and welcome to the Nalcon webinar series. My name is Harshit. I'm a part of Nalcon team and your host for the day. Nalcon annual conference is a unique platform for security companies and evangelists to showcase their research and technology to the community. We have been running webinars for a while now, and this upcoming month there will be some interesting webinars related to malware and threat intelligence. We have also launched our Nalcon online trainings, which is scheduled in this week only from 30 to 16th August. Do check out more details in the chat window or do visit our website nalcon.net. Today we have with us Vikas Singh and he is going to present a talk on the great sandbox Excel. Vikas is currently working as a senior malware escalation specialist at Sophos. He has more than 8 years of experience in information security domain. His prime focus has been investigating and identifying unique and advanced adversarial tools, tactics, and procedures which dissecting critical malware incidents in close conjunction with Sophos Lab. During his countless investigation, the few which have stood out of in uniqueness have been published in Naked Security, Sophos Lab, Uncut Blogs, and white papers. So I welcome him on behalf of all of us. Before we go ahead, a few instructions for the audience. Uh, our today's talk duration is about 30 minutes, and after that we will have a question answer session. So you all can ask your question using chat option after the talk. And also I request you to please keep your mic mute during the session. So thank you again, and I request Vikas to start his session. Vikas, over to you. You're on mute, Vikas.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Harshit. Let me know when the presentation is.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank Nalcon for giving me an opportunity to present here. As it's the first time I'm hosting a webinar, I request you guys to go easy on me. And if you do so, Antariksh will sponsor all your drinks in Goa next year. But seriously, thank you guys for joining. A quick introduction. My name is Vikas, and I do a fair amount of incident response here. As we are a security firm with a huge customer base, you can imagine the amount of stuff we see every single day. But of course, not all incidents are interesting, but only a few stand out in particular. Ransomware has been a hot topic for years. Hence, I carefully picked out 4 of them for our discussion today. These 4 groups are special because apart from encrypting files, some of their tactics focus on circumventing security controls in place. We pitch 4 of them against each other and I'll let you guys decide the winner. I'm going to rush through the first 3, but I'm sure you guys will keep up. Begin with Megacortex. Sandbox evasion and encrypt by proxy. What does proxy means? Let's find out. The ransomware binary is digitally code signed with a valid Authenticode certificate. It means a stolen certificate. The ransomware is compiled for a single victim. It means that every victim gets attacked by a unique sample and you can't be looking for the specific file's hash value in your environment. It means that you cannot get the ransomware to run without a unique base64 password, and the attackers only know the password. It's done to frustrate researchers and evade sandbox analysis. You guys must have heard of application whitelisting, right? It's a useful defense against users running unapproved applications. And this is one of the bypass techniques. Instead of creating an executable application, you let a trusted process do the dirty work for you. So it drops a DLL to encrypt via the trusted Windows executable called rundll32. And it doesn't end here. For every 10 encrypted files, the ransomware spawns a new rundll32. And why does it do so? It does to confuse behavior monitoring. And it also means that the attackers have done their homework about the environment. Generally, a ransomware also attacks network map drives, but not this one. This is to ensure faster encryption. And don't worry, the attackers deploy ransomware to your file server separately. And the last one is that it abuses the trusted Windows Cypher.exe app to wipe unused disk space, which makes data recovery extremely difficult, if not impossible. I'm sure you guys know that from a forensics perspective, the files which were deleted on a Windows OS do not get actually deleted until they are overwritten by new files. So pure and simple, right? The only uniqueness lies in the ransomware binary. No other fancy tactic. Let's move on. The malicious actors behind the Snatch ransomware take a different approach. The uniqueness is not in their sample, but their tactic. Now, people in the audience with sysadmin experience, what's the magic word when you're troubleshooting a system crash or if the OS fails to load? Yes, the safe mode, all the way. What makes Snatch stand out from other groups is that they steal your data prior to encrypting them. Then they threaten you to post the data if the ransom is not paid. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation. Your existing data is encrypted and a copy is waiting to be leaked. That is not how it should be. Anyway, so gone are the days when threat actors tricked you into installing ransomware straight from a suspicious looking email. I mean, it's not gone completely, but our bad guys have gained a lot of patience and experience. Why infect in one go? Instead, they infect a patient zero in your environment, sit around and monitor for a while before they finally strike when the iron is hot. So a couple of features about these actors. The initial access via RDP, as I mentioned it here. RDP. So this protocol was developed by Microsoft, but used mostly by attackers. As you guys know, what does RDP stands for? It stands for Ransomware Deployment Protocol. So what makes Snatch stand out, as I already told you, but there's one more thing which I would like to show you here. This, this is what makes it unique. They keep surveilling you for weeks. And if you're not able to watch or be on their tracks, you have a problem. So the leak site for the Snatch seems to be down as of this morning. But for the purposes of demonstration, here's a screenshot from the Netwalker site. This was taken today morning. If you don't want to see your company's name in here, I advise going through the presentation once again, which has some useful tips at the end. Let's take a quick look at the ransomware deployment tactic, and this is what makes Snatch special. So the ransomware binary is registered as a service in the Windows registry, but the service is not started immediately. Why? So the reason is the bad guys don't want to trip any alarms. So what they do is they create a registry key to automatically start the binary and the service in safe mode. Wait, is that even possible? Windows does not let any third-party service to execute apart from their own, right? Now, it's a lesser known fact that this default behavior can be changed with a small registry tweak. And that's exactly what the bad guys did here. They configured their ransomware to be run alongside with Windows services if the machine boots into safe mode. If. At this point, the bad guys have configured their service. But how would they force the machine to boot into safe mode, right? That's something IT administrators do by pressing F8. The answer is yet again simple. Using bcdedit.exe, the default boot mode can be changed. So the next time when the machine reboots, it does so in safe mode when all of the protection measures are down. So now the ransomware can now happily encrypt everything. And as the machine doesn't even have networking enabled in safe mode, the question of an alarm being raised is out of the picture. Just imagine being a sysadmin coming to work on a Monday morning and all of your computers are stuck on the safe mode and your files, they're all gone. Who would want to be that guy? I certainly wouldn't. So third on our list is Robinhood. Don't let the name fool you. Before I walk you through the infection chain here, it's important to know what a kernel driver is. I'm sure a lot of people in the audience already know it, but for the sake of completeness, a kernel driver is code that runs in kernel mode, ring 0, rather than user mode, which is ring 3. So a piece of code running in the kernel has direct access to the internals of the OS, hardware, etc. As you can imagine, such power in the wrong hands could be pretty destructive. Hence, Windows introduced a feature called driver signing enforcement, which is enabled by default on 64-bit Windows 8 onward, but it's also available in Windows 7, but only 64-bit OSs. So do you guys recognize this pop-up? If you have, I'm sure you'll say it's pretty intrusive at times, but Microsoft is not trying to make your life harder here. This feature ensures that only those drivers will load into the Windows kernel that have been sent to Microsoft for signing. As an administrator, you can easily disable this feature, DSC, via policy controls, but you will need to reboot the machine for the changes to take effect. But the bad guys don't have the luxury of time or a reboot. So let's see what they came up with. Now that you know what a kernel driver is and DSC, it'll be easier to understand the tactic used by the bad guys. The threat actors executed a program which only installed a legitimate and assigned kernel driver from Gigabyte. Yes, the motherboard manufacturer. As this is a signed driver, Microsoft doesn't raise any flags or pop-ups. Why? Because they signed it themselves. But this driver has a known vulnerability. According to the CVE, which is listed above, a local attacker can take complete control of the affected system if he's able to successfully exploit this driver. But instead, our bad guys chose to perform a very specific action. Not anything, but a very specific action. As you can see, just a moment. This is the global variable, which holds the status value for DSC. The specific action which they took is flipping of its value to 0. At this point, DSC is effectively disabled without needing any reboot. Now the DSC is disabled. So what they do is, now they are at the liberty to load any unsigned kernel driver. And the attackers chose to load their own unsigned driver, which was called in our case rbnl.sys. Anything with a sys extension, if it does not stand out, just know that it's a kernel driver and it could warrant an investigation. So this driver was responsible to disable any security software which might have been installed. Now, this is an action which is difficult to perform whilst being in user space, but from the kernel space, it's very easy. So let's take a quick look at the malicious driver which they installed. So this driver had 7 unique ways to kill processes or delete files forcibly. Now, people who have experience on Windows, there are specific system configuration files which you cannot delete simply as an administrator even, but from the kernel space, it's quite possible. And with this rootkit, even more so. So all you need to input is a list of files/services to the rootkit, and it'll get the job done for you. So once the security is down, the ransomware is executed. So do you guys realize what just happened here? As an IT administrator or as an application owner, you could confidently say that none of your applications or operating systems are vulnerable to known exploits, but you could still get owned by this technique. What made Robinhood unique is that the attacker brings his own vulnerability into your environment to disrupt your business. And that is a scary thought. So let's make the discussion even more interesting with the final topic of the day and the highlight. Ragnar Locker. So we saw how Robinhood brought a vulnerability with it. The bad guys behind Ragnar Locker take it to a whole different level. Nobody in the industry had seen this before Sophos. So they bring a virtual box with a pre-configured XP virtual machine to encrypt the files in the physical world. Yes, it's funny and scary at the same time. So let's dig in what it is all about. So it was a calm Friday evening when an alarm was issued by a product. Around 200 machines complained that an executable file called VBox Headless is trying to rapidly modify user files. But when we ran the hash value of that file in VirusTotal and other websites, not a single detection. So we thought it could be a false alarm by a genuine software, right? No. We decided to pursue this alert, which turned out to be a rabbit hole. So the initial access was once again RDP. If you remember the abbreviation, good for you. I hope you still remember. Anyway, so this is a search result from Shodan. If you guys are not aware of it, this is a search engine for everything that's connected to the internet. So this is a search result for this morning. Look at the amount of systems which are facing the internet and listening on the RDP port. Over a million, over 4 million devices. Anyway, so our attacker created a new admin account called Evil to do evil things over RDP. And this was the giveaway. They gave themselves away at this point. So always be on the lookout of any new users which are created in your environment. They also added a group policy object to deploy scheduled task called update VA to domain joined endpoints in servers. Now, people who are familiar with the MITRE attack framework, they'll immediately recognize that this is one of the live of the land techniques, that no file is going to be dropped on the disk. Instead, it will be directly fetched from a web server and installed by MSI exec. Let's take a look in deep. Right. So the attack revolved around a single MSI file. Once again, people with sysadmin experience will recognize this file. They'll also know that there's a way to install an MSI package silently with a QN switch. Q stands for quiet, N stands for no GUI. That's exactly what the bad guys did. Remember this one? The QN switch at the bottom. And I would be installed. So I've simplified this attack in two stages. So the phase one was preparing the physical machine. So when you execute this MSI, it drops a portable version of Sun VirtualBox hypervisor software. The version of the software is from August 2009, when software was still owned by Sun and not Oracle. The MSI also drops a virtual disk image called micro.vdi, which contained a pre-configured operating system. It finally drops an executable called va.exe, which then executed a batch file, which is called install.bat in our incident. So at phase one, we are dropping the files. Now, this is how the installation directory looks like on a victim machine. As you can notice, C program file 686, virtual appliances. There's a batch file called install and the virtual disk image called micro.vdi. So phase one continued. Install.bat registers the VirtualBox application extensions, installs and creates the VirtualBox service. It's a kind of a very extremely silent VirtualBox install. The user or the administrator are not notified in any way. At this point, VirtualBox is now effectively installed, but it does not run anything. It doesn't run a virtual machine yet. The install.bat enumerates all your local disks, removable drives, as well as network drives, and documents it. So, but why do you need to find out? Why does VirtualBox needs to find out what drives do I have? We'll find it out in the next slide. It's so that they can be accessed or writable from within the virtual machine. Um, so the virtual machine hardware is carefully configured so as to not trip any alarms and the users don't complain of a sudden slowness. Because let's face it, a VirtualBox is being installed. When a virtual machine is running, it's bound to do some slow down your machine or performance constraints, but it's done with the bare minimum 256 megabytes RAM and 1 CPU. After noting down your drives, let's say, okay, Antriksh has CDE and a USB drive as well. Okay, I'm going to note it down in one place. And then it terminates process names of line of business apps and security software. It's done to release open locks on documents. For example, if I have a presentation open, a ransomware may not be able to encrypt that presentation because it's still locked by PowerPoint. So this is what they do. It's the hard-coded list of processes. As VirtualBox is installed during phase one, the batch file finally runs the virtual machine using this command. Now, I'm sure some of you might still be wondering, how can they start a virtual machine without a single pop-up or a notification? The clue lies in the vbox headless.exe. VirtualBox has always had a feature called headless mode, which is used to start virtual machines from the command line. A graphical pop-up window with the virtual machines console will not appear. Effectively, we are done with phase one, and now we are entering phase two. Let's take a quick look inside the virtual machine. We can spot a suspicious binary called vrun.exe in the root directory, and that is our ransomware. Just notice the size, okay? 49 kilobytes in size. For forensics people out there, I've also shown the MAC times, which is modified access created. It was created on 9th of May, but only added to the machine on 13th. But how does the ransomware actually execute? So the answer lies in a batch file called vrun.bat, and it was located in the startup directory of the administrator. As you guys know, anything in the startup folder gets automatically executed when the machine boots up and the user logs in. Now, as soon as the VM boots up, this batch file is executed and mounts all the drives which were previously enumerated during phase one. Remember why it documented install.bat? It did so that they can now mount all those drives which are connected to the machine. And those drives are mounted as shared drives to the virtual machine, so that now you can freely perform read, write, delete on them from within the virtual machine. After this is done, after the mounting is complete, then the ransomware is executed by the batch file. So a few noteworthy points about this novel technique. The vrun.exe ransomware runs inside the virtual guest machine. So its process and behaviors can run unhindered, out of reach for security software on the physical host machine. Because let's face it, what do you protect? When you protect your assets, you're protecting your endpoints, laptop servers. You do not, you're not protecting anything running in virtual mode within them. I mean, the entire reason you guys spin up VirtualBox to protect your host machine. But in here, the guest machine attacked your host machine. So, down disk accessible on the physical machine are attacked by the legitimate vbox headless process, which belongs to VirtualBox. So let's say, as a SOC analyst, if you're recording file read-write process by processes, you'll only see that a safe executable is encrypting your files up, and that does not make any sense. It was a highly targeted attack. We are saying this because the ransomware sample was compiled again for a single victim. The ransomware binary, when executed, drops a ransom note with the name of the victim and not with a generic greeting such as "Dear gentlemen" or "Hello people with poor security" and so on. So last but certainly not the least, 122 megabytes installer and 299 megabytes of virtual disk only to run a 49 KB ransomware. This is the extreme lengths at which the bad guys are willing to go to own a network and earn money, and maybe demand 15 million US dollars as a ransom. And that is, and I'm not kidding, 15 million US dollars was the ransom amount. Anyway, barely 1 week before, 1 week ago, I was notified that a different ransomware gang decided to take inspiration from this technique and come up with their own malware. A whopping 733 megabytes installer compared to the 122 in our incident. So later today, I was advised that these two have ganged up to exchange information and tactics. Anyway, this effectively brings us to the end of my presentation. But for the sake of completeness, I would like to say that these signs are an extremely customized list, and you should definitely give this a read later on. Um, these are some cliche recommendations, but they hold true to this date. I know you guys must have been tired of listening to make regular backups, keep them offline and offsite, but ransomware is one of the hottest topics around there, and you wouldn't want anything to happen to your critical business data. So I think I am ready to take on any questions if you guys have.
So thank you, Vikas, for this amazing informative presentation. I'm sure our attendees must have taken a valuable input from it. So please, you can ask your question using chat option. You can type your question in the chat window and speaker will answer them. So Vikas, I have one question till we get any questions. So what is the average time for companies, basically security companies, to find a solution or to handle such attacks, or in like to find a patch on that?
Okay. As you can see, this entire attack is not revolving around, let's say, a specific file or a specific script. It's a bunch of unique tactics that makes up the attack. So we can say that, okay, fine, the 122 megabytes of the MSI, yes, we are going to start detecting it. And even if industry standards, for example, which have EDR, you could simply put in the hash value and then block it. That's fine. But here, what you're seeing is VirtualBox is installing as a legitimate application, right? So the solution to this has always been that you should have trained professionals and threat hunters which should spot anomalies in your network, which should not be happening. For example, you should have an approved list of drivers of applications. And if there's anything apart from it, for example, VirtualBox, it should raise an alarm. And
Okay.
also, as you guys can remember, every endpoint security software has behavior-based techniques. So if the ransomware's behavior is something that you can put a spot on, antivirus vendors come up with a solution in a very small amount of time, given how novel the technique is. It all depends on how unique it is and how much damage can it do. For example, right now, two ransomware attackers have ganged up together. So yes, this is going to blow. I guess you must have heard news. Canon also got hit by Maze, and the sample was again 54 kilobytes of size. So this is the same technique that took place at Canon.
Okay, thank you. Also, because can you please explore more on MITRE sub techniques for our audience? Your views on that?
Yes, of course, of course. It was a July update on MITRE's sub techniques, right? The moment when the sub techniques were announced, we were happy that finally there's not just one umbrella under which everything can be categorized. So, for example, we took a deeper look into the process injection ones. That process injection is just not just one technique. There are process hollowing, DLL side loading, and everything. So, as a security company, we know which technique exactly is being undertaken. So we can flag a similar kind of alert. And I think the antivirus industry should come together and follow the MITRE's attack framework more closely and give it the attention that it deserves. So I think that's a very, very good granularity that MITRE has brought with sub techniques. And I think it's only the beginning of uh, many wonderful things.
Okay, great. We got one more question in chat window. Hope you are able to read it from Sebastian, and one more from Swati.
Mhm. Harshit, can you read out the question,
Yeah,
please?
sure, sure.
Thank you.
So Sebastian is asking, were all these ransomware incidents highly targeted, and did they require a manual bad guy hands-on or assistant, or do they run automatically?
Okay, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. Yes, all four examples which I've told you are highly precise and targeted attack. And this is not an attack which takes place between a 15-minute window or a half an hour window. The adversary had access to your environment for at least a couple of weeks, if not months. So there were signs all along the way in your environment that they are silently sitting, watching, monitoring which antivirus are you using, what is the IT administrator's email address, and so on. They do a lot of homework on your environment, and then they decide on a time when they're going to hit, and it's usually dead into the night in Friday or Saturday, and then the attack is done in within 5 minutes or 10 minutes. They don't give you any head start. So yeah, so this is how an attack like this takes place. And one more thing. So when they finally decide to attack, it is a manual intervention by the bad guys because they already have a channel, a back channel of communication with your environment to their C2 servers.
Okay, thanks. So we got, okay, Sebastian, thank you for that. So as you mentioned, this is my personal question. As you mentioned that each attack is the next stage of the previous one. So when they were monitored, like whoever made that, where they monitored the previous attacks and they start to develop the new ransomware on basis of that.
Okay, can you please come again? I think I understood, but I just want to be sure.
So as you mentioned that each malware is like next level of previous one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there were the monitored planning behind that, like the attackers that like monitor the previous one and try to come up with a new one.
Oh yes, definitely, definitely. Okay, I'll give you a nice example here. A couple of days ago, I was investigating a Sekhmet ransomware. Now, this is also an advanced group of adversaries, but um, so what they did was they first of all tried the GPO method to distribute malware. They failed. Then they did a WMI method of remote invocation. For example, you can fire a single command using WMI to hundreds of machines. Even that failed. And then they tried another way. They kept attacking until they succeeded. So this is how they learn and improve themselves. That in this environment, I think if I try these three techniques, I might be given away. So they straight away choose the fourth tactic. So it's a constant cat and mouse between us and the bad guys.
Okay, we got one more question from Anmol. What medium attackers mostly prefer to deliver the payload? Mail ID or any other?
Um, so the payload, okay. Let's say in all these four cases, what happened was they had established their persistence using a backdoor. Now, the backdoor could be anything from Metasploit, Metapredator, or Cobalt Strike. So Cobalt Strike is a personal favorite of the advanced adversaries because they have a lot of money they can invest in that. So that payload which is running, that backdoor which is running on the endpoint, the payload is transferred over this covert channel to the beacon, and from there on, it's distributed internally in the environment. So it's a question of how it can be missed. So the beacon maintains its communication with HTTP or HTTPS. So if you know what you're looking for, you'll immediately find the beacon because a Cobalt Strike's HTTPS certificate stands out, just like the Tor browsers.
Okay, let's see if we get any question in short. Okay, sure. I guess that's all the question we have from the audience. So thank you, Vikas, once again for this valuable session and your time to deal with the session at Nalcon webinar series. Thank you all for your participation for today's webinar session. Do let us know your feedback. The link is shared in the chat window. We have our upcoming webinar session on medical malware on Android by Axel April on 21st of August, same time 4 p.m. IST. So hope to see you all there. Till then, take care, be safe. Thank you all.
Thank you, Harshit. Thank you,
Thank you,
Antariksh.
Vikas.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining. If you have any questions, the slide deck will be there, and it has the contact details. Give me a shout on LinkedIn, email, whatever. Thank you.